Today we're joined by a special guest, a friend that we made last year at the Print Pomona Art Book Fair. I think I said that right. Uh, I call him my tocayo. We have Luis Blackaller, who is a photographer, visual artist, an amazing person, hailing originally from Mexico City and joining us from LA. And I really don't know a whole lot to say other than his work is awesome. He on social media uses at cartoon distortion, cartoon underscore distortion. So you can obviously follow him on any of the socials that you might be using. But I don't really want to take too much away from him talking about his own work, because I definitely am a fan, and I'm really happy to have you here, Tocayo. Also, for anybody that is curious, we did have a longer interview with him for the Art Block podcast a few months back, so you can always check that out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also on our YouTube channel. Abraham, we're not going to cause a distortion in the fabric of space time, so I think we're okay. We're not the same person. But that said, we obviously are very privileged to have Luis in the house tonight. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Tocayo. Thank you for joining us. Ojalá y nos enseñes algo interesante. And with that, I guess I'll pass it off to you.
I'll do my best, and thank you, Tocayo, for inviting me to be here. I was a little confused at the beginning because we're both called Luis, and I think they were talking to you. Somebody was talking to you, and I thought they were talking to me, which is pretty fun. But no, it feels now like forever that I have known Luis and Abraham, even though it's only been 1 year. We've had some fun together, and it seems that we have a shared passion for photography and how it relates with the written word in like a diversity of forms. So I prepared one of those slideshow decks to go over some of my work. I'll kick it off in just about a minute, but first I want to talk a little bit about what that is going to be about and how I came to put it together just over the weekend. Even though I'm going to talk about a bunch of work that in some cases is decades old, I just put together this framing of this presentation this weekend based on conversation I had with Luis just a week ago, more or less, in which he explained me about this workshop that you all are having together and how it's been framed around this concept of, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, ekphrasis, and which is something that as a word turned out to be new to me, even though it refers to ideas that, as you will kind of see, are very familiar to me, and it is somewhat related with methods that I usually incorporate to my practice. So I'm gonna go to through a few projects that have to do with how I use photography to think about telling stories and how that is related very closely to an experience of the city in general at the ground level, which is something that I like a lot, to experience the city as a pedestrian and try to derive meaning from it, not just to express things I want to tell, but to try and understand our relationship with life in the city and technology and media and things like that. Um, I have a background in filmmaking, specifically production design, which has to do with putting together the world around the camera and the director and the performers of a film so that they can perform the story by inhabiting it. And a lot of that has to do with going to places in the world and adjusting them or uh, appropriating elements from them to create these worlds in which these films will take place. Just naturally, without even thinking about it, this definitely started um, permeating into the way I look at things and the way I try to conceive stories and relationships. So with that, I think that that's probably a good intro to where I'm gonna get into. The other thing I'd like to say before I get started is that I'm gonna go through a few projects. I have like 5 or 6 of them prepared to go through, and it's gonna take some time to go through all of them. Maybe it's worth uh, taking a breath between each one of them and having a little bit of a conversation about them, like ask questions and things like that, if you all think that's a appropriate way of going about things. And then again, happy to be interrupted in the middle of anything, no problem. So that said, uh I think I'm gonna fire up that thing. Well, that's my name, my website, my Instagram account, which even though I dislike anything that has to do with the company called Meta, I have found that a lot of the people that I love in the community that I wanna be a part of are there. So I just, I'm happily active on Instagram. This is something that I was talking about before, thinking about photography and writing and what it means to me. It has to do with building narrative meaning from experience. Photography is a good way, as well as like film, video, and other recording methods to capture information from reality that can be afterwards used to produce other materials. And even though ekphrasis is not, precisely defined this way, it seems to be a literary device to write about or inspired by uh, other forms of art, like the visual arts, architecture, things like that. I think it lives in this more malleable realm of like spaces where a lot of things intersect. And I think, or at least I believe, that I have been using some form of ekphrasis in my practice for a long time as a bridge to create fiction by capturing aspects of experience and then playing with them to storyboard, to make designs, to explore concepts, even to interpret them. Um, and that happens very clearly in film. I could, think about a scene that happens in downtown LA and try and figure out how to stage it by taking a bunch of pictures of it and drawing on top of them, and then I have a storyboard. It's actually a very powerful tool to make illustrations. You come up with a concept for illustration, then you research the stuff that's going to be in that illustration, and then you can use those materials to create your illustration. But from the perspective of narrative and coming up with actual stories to tell within the background of a particular city, I have found myself oftentimes going through the city, creating images by taking photographs, by filming, but then drawing on top of them, then rearranging them in ways that let me somehow conceptualize and envision or imagine a sort of series of situations that take place within them that could let me also think about what life is like in this city, and also think about stuff that I could find meaningful to tell about the inhabitants of this city, about the city that they inhabit, if you will. That sounds like a little bit like a tongue twister, but um, you will probably find that a little bit more clear when I go through the examples. In a way, photography as a medium has changed a lot from the time I was born to today. And I'm gonna start going to the projects now. The first one is called Ojo de Gato. It's a project from the 20th century that I put together between 1997 and 1998. And it's a perfect example of what I was just saying before about how much photography has changed. And, you know, I was pretty much born with a camera in my pocket, believe it or not. But I didn't get my hands on a digital camera until like probably 1999 or the year 2000, believe it or not, as well. So this project, even though I was already using photography in a way that feels uh, very digital, very invasive, very kind of in the middle of my experience of everyday life, it was still done with film photography using this small camera called the Canon ELPH, I think, which used this little film cartridges called APX. And it was very practical because you could actually do the thing where you had it in your pocket. At that time, I don't know everywhere else, but at least in Mexico City, people already had cell phones in their pockets, and they also had this pagers for text messaging. And I did adopt the pagers, but I refused to have a cell phone until a lot later. So in my pockets, you could find a pager, a wallet, and this little tiny camera. The photograph that you see here was taken with that camera. And it's a photograph of an installation I made, which is called Ojo de Gato, which I assembled using my archive or my collection of photography taken during and around jobs that I was doing in Mexico City as art director and as a set designer for film and television, going to warehouses, going to city dumps to find things that I could use, going to sound stages, going to buildings where locations were going to be. And I went back to these photographs, and I went back to this photograph and I started assembling them in a way that I felt I could find the means to tell a story that would be uh, a night in the life of a stray cat, a street cat in Mexico City, which there's a ton of those, and you see them around, and you can always imagine the stuff they'd see, right? Because they can sneak around anywhere and they can see everything. So, all these photographs, a lot of them, like I said, are more like around the work. Some of them are pictures of objects, pictures of printed materials, pictures of people, pictures of cats, which, there's cats everywhere. And I would just take pictures all the time, like I do today with my phone, but under those circumstances. I think there's this transformation that happens here, as I showed in that first slide with that diagram, in which a personal experience of the city is now transformed through this mediation, through photography and through drawing, screen printing, into these building blocks for something that could be, very roughly, very brushstrokes, conceived as some sort of telling of a story on a silent movie comic book form. And every time I install it, I can rearrange the frames, and I can also take some of them out. There's a very long story that happens on the little squares, and then the larger squares are kind of the trailer for that story, if you want to think about it that way. But it always ends with the cat run over by a car. So it's a cat witnessing humans, and it's a kind of like a very dreamlike kind of story. So this is, I think, the first time in my life where I deliberately, even though not fully conscious of what I was doing, tried to use my addiction to photography. I think my compulsion to photograph stuff all the time as a sort of raw material to assemble something that could be put together as a different form, which is a written form that is taking place as sequential art, in this case, through the installation to tell some kind of experience of a story. And this, took me different places later on. I think this piece is very straightforward in that regard. You have a bunch of photographs and then you transform them into something that then you can use to have a very loose kind of story. But it took me to very different kind of places, ultimately bringing me back to material that could potentially be conceived as more traditional, but where I find that there's a more clear vision of how I am using the imagery to understand how to, in my case, tell stories. And yeah, that's the end of that one. Do we want to talk about it a little bit, ask questions, or
Yes.
there you go.
So
Good.
can I ask a question? I'm just wondering, you have quite a few abstract slides, and I'm wondering what, is it the sky or is it representative of something? And also, my other question is, it looks like you took them and the photographs and you morphed them with some kind of program. And I'm wondering if you did that.
Well, those are great questions. This project in particular has a lot to do with the experience of a printmaking technique called screen printing. Back then, I was commissioned to produce a few fake Andy Warhol artworks for a Mexican movie called Sexo, Pudor y Lágrimas. And I was given some freedom. They wanted to have something like, there's a Warhol piece that is made of the face of Mao Zedong 9 times, and Warhol would do this thing where he would have the screens and he would just kind of like use the squeegee to gloss over them and create these very expressionistic forms of different colors that would make the pictures of the same screen kind of like unique and different. And then by arranging them together, he would get this very decorative piece that would show kind of the variations that could come from the screen printing form if you treat it like as a painter, right? I did one in this movie that used Ho Chi Minh instead of Mao Zedong. But just for fun, just to kind of like have my fun with it, I experimented on it with printing on stainless steel. And what you get with printing on stainless steel is that the ink, which is like slightly transparent, lets you see through and still reflects the light and those kind of things. And it also becomes very apparent the patterns that the squeegee does. So these squares that you pointed out that are very abstract are meant to represent blank spots in the consciousness of this cat. They could be that the cat is dreaming or just passed out, or we don't know. They are like little moments of like disruption that when you go through this and start to realize there might be a story there, which is something that is not told to you as somebody that experiences this installation, it's an opportunity for you to think about how these things were made and also take a little breath, right? So that's what they are for. They are like moments of emptiness from the perception of the character that is carrying on the perspective of the story. The way the images were put together is very interesting. This was, computers were already there. Photoshop was already there. But it was, a lot more resource intensive to do anything with that. I could go on Photoshop and manipulate my photographs, and then in order for me to make the positives to print this, I would have to spend a ton of money that I didn't have at the time, right? And what they ended up doing, because the photographs were actually taken with a camera that is not digital, with that Canon ELPH camera, and that's where these little squares come in. These little squares are really like 4 by 4 inches or something like that. And I would take the prints that came out of, where you went and print your photos, like the Kodak booth at the CBS or whatever it is. And I would trace on top of them with transfer paper to get the figure of the design. And the figure of the design was the Black King. Then I did all those, and I went to a photocopy place and blew them up to 3 times their size, which is the next type of the squares. And I had them just like photocopies of like black and white drawings. And then I used those, but I traced directly onto the screen print screen with the blocking chemical that stops the ink from going through. So I was tracing those drawings on the negative form. And I did the same with the red. So it's really like two colors, because the first thing you do is the blue, but you're playing around. There's no image. And then you print the red, and then you print the black. But that's how it came to be. The editing of the photography to turn it into these more graphical forms was done as analog process for the most part, really. There was no digital involved in this case, which I find today very refreshing. Back then, I did it because it was cheaper, but now I would do it because I don't want to use a computer in purpose sometimes. I I don't know if that more or less.
No, it was beautiful. That was beautiful. I really, I just wrote it, you know, I think that you're transferring a lot more emotion into the pieces versus it being a digital image. It's really interesting. Very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it makes them a lot more expressive, and it kind of like really embraces the error. Another thing you can see is, you know, when you do super precise type of screen print, it's very difficult to get them right because there's tiny lines and a lot of colors, and you have to be very careful with how you do it. Here, it was like very easy to just do it, and you know, if things didn't match exactly, they would create artifacts that actually were embraced by the style. So it was very easy to produce, and because of the scale of it, I really needed that. This was part of a workshop, and I had to get this ready in like a month or so. And I had one person helping me. So it was kind of like some of the release to the more expressionistic style of it was not just for creative or poetic reasons, but also practical ones, which are always important. So there's that one. It's kind of, I wanted to use it as an intro to where we're heading. And
we do have a couple more questions, Tocayo.
there you go. Fire them up.
So this one comes from Eric. It says, thank you for sharing Ojo de Gato. Really like the use of 3 focused colors to tell the story. Those mini images to the right of the storyboard, the sequential art, how did they add to the narrative? Y luego Abraham después.
They imagine that the bigger the it's like the bigger frames tell you the story like a trailer, like in 10 minutes, if you will. And when you go at the little ones, you start to recognize that some of the big ones are there, but there's a lot more to that expands on the duration, on the sequence of actions that take place around like every situation. So it's basically the same narrative, and it's the same idea in the sense that it is not very clear what's going on. You know, it's a cat wandering around a city at night. It always ends the same way, but it carries you through a series of events in which you see things happening. But that's what those are. And part of it being as loose as it is allows me to reconfigure them every time. So like I can come in and re-edit just by putting them up in a wall and choosing the sequence to go in a different order.
Cool. Abraham?
My question is, how do you end up choosing those 3 colors if you think about it? And also, how many screens do you have to print for this? A burn.
Well, the colors, how do you choose the colors? Comes with just, that's just a insight, right? I was working on the Ho Chi Minh piece before. I used a lot of colors, and I kind of got enamored with that combination, and I went with it because it has good contrast and it looks good. The screens were not printed. Like I painted on them by hand with this blocking material. And these are like, each one of the prints are only one of a kind, right? So I didn't print 10 of them of each, right? It's just one. So what I would do is I would go to my friend's shop that I was working with, and we would have, I don't know how many screens we had. They were the bigger square size. And I would print a few of them, not print. I would go with my, my drawings and my photocopies. I would paint on them with this blue liquid, which is called bloqueador, which means blocker. I still use it. That thing is very useful for that, because you just get the screen and you paint on it, and where you paint, it's like negative. The ink is not gonna go through that. You paint on it, you let it dry, you print, and then you wash it, you paint on it, you print. So like we would do a few every night, like 4 or something. And the little ones, the good thing is we could put 9 of them at the same time in the same screen. So it was like, okay, boom. But it did take a while. I spent a few weekends doing this, like, from the early morning to late at night. We drank a lot of caguamas doing that. But it was fun and very toxic. That's the other thing, that I don't do this anymore, because the inks that you have to use to print on metal are the worst possible kind. It's probably, if I ever get like some weird brain thing when I'm older, it's probably because of this.
Yeah. I think they have changed a lot of those chemicals and many things.
Well, the metal ones are like, because they have to actually adhere to the metal. There's some things that they have to be like that. So the only way around it is by wearing those masks, and you can be perfectly safe. But we were like a bunch of like 25-year-olds in Mexico City. We didn't really know. And if we knew, we probably wouldn't have cared. It's like the 90s. I don't know. Uh, there was ventilation, but we didn't wear masks, which is dumb. Like it's not it's not very smart that we did that. Yeah.
Wow.
Comes
We have a hand raised from Nettie.
Hi. So I have a question. How, maybe it's not directly related to the process of elaborating the art installation, but I'm just curious, how do artists usually participate in these art installations? Like, I always wonder, how's the behind the scenes of things?
Well, that's a very good question. And in that regard, the cultural institutions in Mexico are very different from what they are here in the US. This was part of a workshop that was taught at the institution called the Centro Nacional para la Cultura y las Artes, that in Mexico City has a whole, it's built next to Churubusco Studios, which was, the equivalent of Studio City from the golden era of Mexican cinema. There's still sound stages there, but now it has this complex dedicated to the fine arts. There's like concert halls and movie theaters and museums, but there's also a very big school called La Esmeralda, which is the kind of like it's the continuation of basically San Carlos, which is oh no, San Carlos went to the UNAM, I think, or something like that. But it's like it has a relationship with the oldest education institution for learning the fine arts in this continent from the Western perspective, right? And you can you can go there and get a MFA or things like that, but you can also take workshops with artists that are prominent in Mexican culture. And some of these artists managed to get the funds from the government to put together exhibits in the spaces that are in this place after that. And that's what happened in this case. We took the workshop. It was like about 15 to 20 people. And the workshop was taught in this school. And after that, a huge kind of like space there that is used as a gallery for installations was dedicated to put together a show where we showed all these pieces. So it was a state-funded, in this case, state-funded endeavor that was aimed at the education for the arts.
Oh, it's pretty cool. That's a very I like the support that you were given, and I'm sure that they're still given to many artists. So thanks for sharing, Luis. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, that's one of some of those great things. Of course, like, I did have to pay for all my materials, but I was happy to do so. And it was a great opportunity. The rest of the show was great, but I didn't document it because selfishness.
So nice, so cool.
Yeah. Well, we can continue talking about this one if you guys want, or I can move on. What do we do?
Hay que seguirle.
¿Le seguimos? Okay.
Eh.
Pa' acá. All right. Goodbye, Ojo de Gato. Now, this one is called the Red Line Tour. This one is big jump to about 11 years later. This was work that I did in collaboration with somebody else called Andy Cavatorta after I went to get a master's degree at the MIT Media Lab. And this represents, I wouldn't call it a shift, but like transformation in like my perspective towards not just photography, but art in general, that evolves from not just what you just saw in Ojo de Gato, but other things and time that I have spent studying now digital media and interactive systems as potential mediums for art making. And this is a public art piece. And you could see in the previous one, there was already hints of interactivity where like I was able to put the installation together in a different way every time. That makes the art somewhat built towards itself being modifiable, in this case by me. But if you push that idea further, you start to see potential for the art to be created by the facilitation of these interactions and making it more of a sort of less of a reflection of one's experience, but a reflection of the experience one has with others on specific communities that incorporate their own experiences as well as a part of a sort of action or happening that takes place in this case in what could somewhat be conceived as a public space. So yeah, this one is from 2008. It's not, yeah, it is 11 years or 10 or 9 or something. I made a mistake. I thought I was going to talk about another one, but this is still relevant. This one is called the Red Line Tour. And what I did for this one, when compelled to put together a public art piece that interacted with the city of Boston and the public space in the city of Boston in a way that it would tell, that was kind of like the prompt, in a way that it would tell something about the city to the inhabitants of the city that I was living in. So I was also an inhabitant of the city using the spaces that were publicly available for them. And then again, I went in this kind of self-reflective manner in which I ended up conceiving, I wanted to talk about and surveillance and segregation. And I wanted to somewhat use the subway transportation system in Boston as not just my subject matter, but also my canvas and also the subject of the message. Looking at as you traverse to one of the subway lines there, in this case, the red line, which is the one that I use every day to go about from MIT to other places. I realized how much it changes if you take it all the way from one end to the other. How much it changes once you enter Harvard and then you go to the Boston Commons and then you start going out into the distance. And I realized that if I started looking at surveillance cameras within that system and observing them as if I was a bird watcher, like, people have this hobby when they go to the park or something and they watch the birds and take pictures of them. So I was thinking, I'm going to do the same thing with the surveillance cameras. And I did that over time, but also across the distance in the city and doing it inside the subway stations, looking at where the surveillance cameras were, taking pictures of them and thinking about what they meant. And I realized a bunch of different things, which is the density of the surveillance cameras was very different on one station from the other, to the point where there were stations where there were no surveillance cameras at all. And there were stations where you had, the Harvard is crazy. You will see that about it in a second. But took all these pictures, again, creating some visual artifact that then I'm going to use to tell a story, which in this case became a little bit of an advertisement campaign to message the people taking the subway to look around for the surveillance cameras and think about what they mean. And this was, here are some pictures of some of the locations to give you kind of like a sense of the vibe of the red line subway stations in Cambridge and Boston in Massachusetts. And this is more or less how I went about it. This is an example, which is Harvard and Harvard Square. And this is insane. Like, look at the cameras in Harvard Square. Why in the world do they look like that? I haven't seen surveillance cameras like that anywhere in this planet. They look like out of a BioShock thing. It's like, what are they trying to communicate? There's not only a ton of them, they are saying we're the most robust surveillance you can ever see, right? And then here's one of them again with the advertisement that I had put together, mimicking exactly the format of where you put them. And this is where the transgression happens, which is part of what I love about public art, that this kind of public art, you go to the public place and you intervene it without permission and without asking if anybody wants you to do that, right? And I did this for like all the different stations in the red line. I'm going to show only this one because otherwise I would take forever going through this. And I think the point is made very simply, just like that. There's a picture where like I'm installing them. We did that very early at like 5:30 or 6 a.m. when the train starts running. And we did it over a bunch of trains. And then that was it. And something that I found like very interesting is that, Boston and Cambridge, that's a college town. There's about 42 colleges in that city. And a lot of them are specialized on medical science and, training people to become NDs and stuff like that. there are a lot of labs for like pharma research and neuroscience research and all that. And when you go to the subway in this city and you're just sitting there going from one station to the other, you see a lot of advertisements for you to go and sign up as a test study for experiments of the mind and of the body so that they can pay you and you can go drink more beers or whatever you want to do with that money. But there are a lot of ads. You can look at them here on the first two pictures in the bottom. One of them is probably for depression. The other one is for sleep. And it became very interesting to me how like the combination of the campaign for awareness against surveillance, distribution of surveillance in the subway train is now kind of getting combined with these ads for the real world that always hint at, mental health issues and behavioral anomalies that you want to deal with by going to a laboratory where they can experiment on you for a couple of days or weeks or months or whatever it is. So that combination was very interesting to me. And yeah, that's it for this one, I think. How are we doing on time?
We have about half an hour left.
Not a lot of time. Do we want to keep going or talk about this one a little bit? We could just talk about all of them at the end. We have a half hour left, right?
So,
Yes, Cavatorta, Andy Cavatorta. You can Google the guy. He's like a crazy person that makes musical robots, but he was not a part of this one. I thought the other project that is about to come was going to come here. That was my mistake. This was a project that I did by myself. I'm glad that I saw that and I could point that out. That was my bad. I kind of got confused. It happens. It got dark. So this one was by myself. It was a public art piece that I did as part of a class I took at MIT, and I did deploy it in Boston, and it was very interesting.
Eric says those depressing ads remind me of daily news.
Yep, especially these days.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was, you can see how photography was just to tell stories. In this case, a story, about surveillance and about segregation. Like, why are there cameras some places or not others? And like, look at them and ask questions about them. So I'm gonna move on, unless feel free to interrupt. This is the one that I did with Andy Cavatorta. And this is another piece of like, yeah, that's the guy. This is another piece of public art that I did with him. And this one was done in art gallery that a friend opened in the neighborhood of Red Hook in Brooklyn, New York, which is an interesting place in New York City because, at least at the time, it was the only neighborhood in one of the boroughs that didn't have a subway station in it. So in order for you to get there, you have to do it by other means, like walk or ride a bicycle and all that. But then one day, they put IKEA in this neighborhood in the docks. It's a very historical fishing neighborhood. When they put the IKEA in there, they also, IKEA itself started doing this thing, having a ferry that would go from Red Hook to Chinatown in Manhattan, back and forth all day long, bringing people back and forth from Chinatown to the IKEA for free as a way to lure in customers. New Yorkers, being New Yorkers, quickly started realizing that that was basically free public transportation to a location that was very cool, which was Red Hook, a historical Brooklyn neighborhood that had a history of like fishing. It has also projects that are mostly that were mostly inhabited by, they are still mostly inhabited by African American and people of Caribbean ascent, like Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and Haitians and things like that. And because of the IKEA ferry and probably other reasons, the overall kind of gentrification of the Brooklyn borough at large, it started to get, the fishing docks started to be populated by like a pretty vibrant artistic community that, so the situation, the artists and the original inhabitants kind of like lived in this little bubble of Brooklyn because people couldn't get there by train, but there were a lot of traffic at the same time from the IKEA ferry. And this art gallery here, that's Red Hook right there. That gives you a picture of where it is in Brooklyn. And the place where this gallery was, which I visited my friend there one day, is, you know, on the left-hand side, the building on the circle. And this street called Richards that crosses there on the diagonal separates the neighborhood in what I found to be like a very interesting way, which was on the right-hand side of Richards, you can see the beginning of the projects. If we go back here, well, no, you cannot see anything there, sorry. You can see the beginning of this project. So on the right-hand side of Richards, that's where the Caribbean, African-American, working class background population lives. And on the left-hand side of Richards, you get the fishermen and the artists. And I noticed that they were all living very cordially amongst each other, but there was almost zero interaction between one side and the other side of Richards. And came up with this idea about making a scale version of this intersection and then going around the street, talking to people and asking them if they could let us take pictures of them to make these little dolls from them and then put them in this scale model of this intersection. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's a 3D model. In the circle, that box represents the gallery, and you can see how this intersection is gonna be put together in there, alongside a few other artistic artifacts. Now, the scale version of the neighborhood, which was laser cut and assembled using a particle board, is way smaller in scale than the dolls. We did that in purpose so that the dolls are like pretty much Barbie sized. And you can see here the gallery assistant standing in for a crew of filmmakers that made a little short about it. And in the background, you see the installation in progress with all the people in there. Here you can see me kind of taking the back side of the subjects after taking the front side, and that's how we would assemble the dolls. They would be the back side and the front side, they would be then put together and pasted onto particle board, and then laser cut. And then you have this kind of like, you know, now you would probably 3D scan them and 3D print them. But back then, this was what we could do. And it has kind of like an artistic quality to it that I really like. On the right-hand side, you can see the assistant, whose name is Anna, posing with her doll and the hammer that she used when we got the doll. And in the background of the last of the pictures, we made a wallpaper with just the outline, the silhouettes of everyone that got captured. And the idea with this was to create some kind of hype around the events that was going to happen in the gallery that would get everyone from the neighborhood inside the art gallery to experience the art gallery together. People, the people like the guys on the left-hand side at the top would have never, they would have walked in front of all the galleries that were there, but they would have never walked in them. So we got this group of people that was living with the art world, but not interacting with it, to get in there and experience it in a way that they themselves became the art. And that we thought was very powerful. The film crew made a little documentary about it, and it was like screened on the wall of the gallery, and it was kind of like a whole very, 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 very nice thing. And there's a ton of stories of like stuff that happened there. I have the little film in here, but maybe I'll share it so that you can watch it later if you're interested. It's only 4 minutes, but you know.
Basically, we start by asking people to stand still while we take a front picture and the back picture. And then we print those in laser printer. Would you let us make it all of you?
So, you know, the thing goes on, and you can watch it later, or I can play it if we're out of time, but I think it's probably, I was willing to play it, but since we don't have a lot of time, I think it's, you know, somewhat nicer if I continue talking and then we chat a little bit, and I can share URLs of where all this media is located for later if anyone is interested. So this one is called Black and White City. This one is from 2004, and it's closer in spirit to Ojo de Gato, but it's also something that, in terms of, you know, you saw the other two, how like the pictures, the photography was used to create stories that then were used to intervene public space and communicate with the members of a specific community or social group, like the people that use the Red Line train in Boston, or in this case, the inhabitants of Red Hook, to compel them to interact with each other in a way that they didn't do before. And it's not as a direct transition from making a picture and then making a story out of it, like Ojo de Gato was. But this one, Black and White City, is this one was a residence, artist in residence that I got again through like one of these Mexican institutions that support the arts, to go and make a graphic arts installation that, in this case, reflected upon the experience of life in New York City. And again, lots of photography and lots of video, and then lots of curation and trying to understand what to say about the city. And in this case, it's probably, it was my first time in New York City, actually. So it was like fairly overwhelming. And I focused for that reason in sort of experience of the city in isolation. During this time, even though I did a lot of fun things there and I met a ton of people, I also experienced a lot of the city alone late at night, just going on the trains or walking around, all those kinds of things. And I think that somewhat really influenced my framework. And I started thinking about kind of like very similar stories to the protagonist of Scorsese's Taxi Driver, right? The like the the deep thinking loner that gets caught in these crazy loops of like imagination and paranoia and madness. And kind of I went there a little bit, but not in a bad way, just in the storytelling way. And all those pictures started to be processes. Came up with some characters that were basically living in isolation, surrounded by this skeleton of a city. And here you can see me processing all these photographs, playing with how to make them work in sequence, and also starting to make the originals for a series of screen prints that I never ended up doing. I ended up moving away from screen printing into just drawing with ink and making animations in this case. And you can see here some of this effort of now very deliberately using digital tools to mess around with the pictures of the city. I did a series of them where you can see the top right and bottom left corner, where I would basically take these pictures in the middle of a busy day in Manhattan and take out the people and see how it looked like a city with ghosts in there, where the people become these silhouettes. You can see how this started to brew within me the idea of something that I could do in the opposite manner when I went and did the Red Hood thing, in which rather than being an observer that removes the people from the picture of the city, you are a participant that welcomes the people into becoming a part of a representation of the city. But because of the nature of this, these are some of the ink drawings that I made there. And then again, starting to look at them and thinking about how could they become the landscape of a character that's walking through them and thinking about what's happening to them. This is the final installation I did there. Another thing that I loved about my time in Manhattan, because it was very different from my experience coming from Mexico City. Like you would walk down the streets and there would be a completely perfectly functioning television in the street, and I would like grab it and take it and make it part of my installation, that kind of thing. You would never see that in Mexico. Nobody will throw away televisions, cameras, printers, computers that work. So this became that installation in the studio that they had given me. And I wrote a few stories that, funny enough, I forgot about until very recently when I was thinking about putting together this presentation for you all. And now I'm looking at them and I'm thinking about rewriting them, because at some point last year, I started putting together a scene using the pictures from this experience to make a little scene, which is, not a graphics installation like the stuff I used to do, but something like this. I even made a dummy for it. But it's a picture book, right? And now I'm thinking transforming it into not a picture book, but an actually written book, since I have those stories and I do write, and use the pictures as illustrations for it and making it into something else. So I'm working on that. It's a long journey for this project, that started in 2004 and then fall back from my memory probably about a year later and up until very recently. And it's a very interesting thing for me at least, to see how these images inspired these stories that I wrote about living in New York City that then I forgot about, that now have a meaning that can be very useful for me to understand my own memory. And that's it for this one. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about something that is the reason that I met Luis and Abraham, and I'm very interested in these days, and I find it like not only a great source of inspiration, but also a place where I can very comfortably deposit my artistic expression, which is scenes, making scenes, and going to scene fests and reading other scenes and interacting with the scene community at large. And this is a scene that I have been making that is called Defectuoso, and is a street photography scene that I have been putting together with my archive of photography that I have collected from 1984 to date. So it's tons of cameras used and lots of pictures from like all different eras, but all very important from the perspective of experiencing the city at the ground level on foot. And very important to this. Some of them in the cars or public transportation, but mostly on foot. And a funny thing that happened with this one, which has to do in a way with, not in a way, very directly with the concept of ekphrasis, just to kind of like close things around that concept that is very important to your workshop right now, is that I originally intended to put together these scenes as pictures accompanied with writing about the pictures and as a kind of like autobiographical essay, memoir, fiction kind of thing. But while putting together these scenes, I was having so much fun with the pictures and printing them on the risograph printer that I kind of in part got lazy and decided to just do that thing that I do all the time, which is use the montage techniques to, juxtapose sequences of images in a way that they convey a sense of storytelling. And again, I also have a video here that I can share where it is.
Defectuoso, in a
It will give you
nutshell,
an
is a
idea.
serialized photography journal about life in the streets of Mexico City from 1985 to 2019. It is my own personal witness account. The Spanish word defectuoso used to be the nickname for Mexico City during the time I lived there, from 1969 to 2006. It is a wordplay derived from the abbreviation of the words Distrito Federal, Spanish for Federal District, the city's former official name. Today, Mexico City is officially known as CDMX. Defectuoso means defective in Spanish. In my opinion, a fairly appropriate label for any city that grows to be that large.
He explains it a lot better than I do, so I recommend that you kind of go check it out. I can put the URLs on the chat as soon as I exit this presentation.
Yeah, the defectuoso scene was definitely the one that introduced us to each other, right? Because we were sitting next to each other at the Print Pomona Art Book Fair, and when I got up to check out my tocayo's table, it was definitely the first thing that caught my attention because of the colors, and I love photography, street photography specifically. So definitely check that out. But does anyone have any questions or comments about Luis's work? Yes, Julie?
Very inspirational. I loved how you were so directed by your photography in a narrative way. But it always kind of like bounced back to the picture, pictorial sort of narrative. And it really did something to my brain that it hasn't happened before. And I'm grateful for you did something that opened something up in my head that's going to help me
That's cool.
move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It makes my day that you say that, really. As an artist, oftentimes all you expect is to touch someone in some way. So that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I think to me is I like to call myself a filmmaker from the future, but that might mean uh, filmmaker lost between dimensions, or somebody that looks at the world with the eyes of a filmmaker and wants to do so many things with that get lost in the process. I think there's some of that uh, that happens to me, and then I dabble between cartoons and architecture and public art and all these kind of things. Technology for the longest time was really something that attracted me so much. And now I'm kind of like wary of it, obviously, because of the times we're living in and thinking about it from a completely different perspective. But it's still been very useful to me that I immerse myself so much within it so that I now can have a critical perspective about what the what are the relationships between technology and power, between technology and capital, between technology and policy, and how can we interact with the different media that revolve around us so that they can potentially be set up in ways that uh, actually do what they are supposed to do, which is help enhance our human experience from like a human perspective rather than uh, help enhance systems of extraction of value for investors and things like that. So it's still useful for me, but to kind of frame things from a technological perspective, but I definitely try to look at it differently now.
I think just one more comment. I think your idea of subversion is really an interesting thread in your ideas, and I'm really interested in that in what you do. So I see that in your future, but I think that it's just a really, really interesting thread in what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I've been looking at how to say things for a long time, and I might be able to start just saying them now, in more clear manner.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that takes a lot of artists a while to get to.
Yep.
Yeah. Abraham?
I found fascinating because like I had met you like later in life, but to see you how you incorporated technology when it was fresh. And now, for example, when you're looking at the cameras, now you look at the state of the world, that's even more, what's it called, scary, the way we're being tracked and the way we've been used and misused, especially with AI, like all these, how do we take up on these new technologies in the way that we used to do that? Or I don't know, maybe it's just our generation that we're more worried than younger generations nowadays, right? It's probably the pace of getting old.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think we're going through a sort of a transition phase right now that, there was a digital technology boom that was very utopian and very hopeful, but also in a very fake way. All that, a lot of that was driven by, investment interests. And now we're coming to realize the reality of all those, utopias. What did they actually mean? How the things like social media that was supposed to help us communicate together, and everybody has a means of expression and a personal publishing channel, basically. I mean, when you think about this in abstract, sounds great. If you go back to 2003 and think about that, sounds like a dream come true. But then when you realize that that comes with the shackles of extractive capitalism, and you put 20 years on top of that, you end up where we're at. So the thing is, uh, we know that now. We know that technology is nothing but what we make of it, and whether we continue letting these situations take place or not, it's probably up to us a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah. And well, thank you for that. And also, I really appreciate the fact that you use the people in the community to draw the people of the community to the gallery. This is one of the things that we're always trying to tell our students. Like sometimes you have to forget, oh, this is my project. It's like my art, and have to remember that this is for people, because it's the people you have to get them interested of what you're doing. And that's kind of the epiphany of it, or like the perfect way of showing that, like, let me interest the people by giving their interest, which their interest is a little selfish because it's them, but I like that they use that at its core, and then it work that way. It's pretty good.
I mean, that's the power of contemporary public art. It's really an art form that, at its core, as I believe, or I think that the way it's understood by the main proponents of it, it's basically, you as an artist, you act as a conduit for the enabling of social programs in a way that empower people to just improve the way they relate to their world. And public spaces are out there, and they are becoming smaller and smaller because of the privatization of everything. And it's another one of the big struggles that I think it's important to take a part on, like how can we go about the conservation of public space? And you can look at the difference between the global north and the global south, and how much more public space, even though how much more lack of infrastructure there is on the global south, there's a lot more public space there than what you can find in the global north, where the public spaces have started this from a long time going to be replaced by fake public spaces that are really privatized locations like shopping malls and things like that. So that's another thing. I mean, the fact that you have to go in a city like Boston, that you have to go to the subway stations to find something that resembles a public space, and that's because the subway train system in Boston is publicly owned and publicly operated still, but that might not last for long, right? Like there's that tendency of thinking that, public goods should not exist in this country, and they should. And then there's a difference between public goods and government control. And it's very difficult to understand that difference sometimes in the global north. But yeah, I mean, we can talk about all these things forever. Yeah. Happy to do it any other time, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for Abraham. Are we talking communist now?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your work. Eric wrote in the chat, really inspirational body of work. I can see the progression and influences of various projects, especially integrating past works to the more recent stuff. Do you plan on taking your storytelling further, perhaps in something more immersive, VR stuff or augmented reality? I'm adding that part.
Not if I can, but who knows? Yeah, I mean, I had a job working on a VR studio for 10 years, and I quit because I was, just eager to look elsewhere. So I'm now more in the real world than in the virtual one, and I intend to continue printing stuff and writing stuff and maybe making films. And something that I would love to do again, but I haven't done in a while, is more like public art programs. Perhaps there's a way to, resuscitate the shrinking of the people thing with communities that could appreciate this, where it could make sense for them here in LA somewhere, I don't know, just thinking.
Sounds like a future project for us to think about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have your thing going on with the transportation systems, right? It's like that's just kind of like honey. Sounds like honey to me.
Nice.
There's definitely thematic alignment. I like that.
Yeah. So it is just past 8 o'clock if in case anyone does need to log out. I did put the homework for this week in the chat if in case anyone is curious. The homework is in the spirit of Luis Blackayer's artwork that is curious about how we see things, create a photo and poem that analyzes how we see and are seen. I didn't have time to translate that since I just made it up.
Nice.
Get. But again, that's hard. Maybe. The point is to obviously have fun and interpret the idea of how we see and how we are seen as openly as you or you can interpret it, right? Um, obviously Blackaller has his own style and his own way of maybe answering that theme, that prompt, but I'm sure all of you can do this. And you only have to do one. So unlike the last homework where Abraham asked you to do 2 poems and 2 photos, you only have to do one photo and 1 poem, whether they're related or not, or it as long as you are thinking about that idea of how we see and are seen. And of course, we'll give you until, well, this time around, I want to push you all to see if you can turn in something by Friday. So that way for next Tuesday, we'll have your work ready to workshop. Thank you, Abraham, for translating that. So yeah, and if you have already pre-existing photos, feel free to use pre-existing photos. Don't feel like you have to go out and take a new one. But yeah, I just want to say again, thank you, Tocayo, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. For everyone that joined in on the live streams, also thank you for joining in. Don't forget to follow Luis Blackaller at cartoon_distortion on Instagram and most of the other social medias too, if I remember correctly. And you can check out his website, cartoondistortion.com, to see more of his work. And yeah, thank you. Anyone have any final questions or comments for my Tocayo before I close out our live streams?
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure to.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.